Welcome everybody to today's discussion on climate change adaptation, a lever for economic growth post-COVID-19. I want to let you know that we are recording this virtual gathering. So to begin with, I would like to ask that you please introduce yourself. So in the chat box, if you can please enter where you're calling from and what motivated you to join today's webinar. So before I go much farther, I would like to introduce myself. I am Veronica Rocha. I will be your host for today's discussion, and also co-hosting with me is Jeff Lapola. He's also going to be helping us with the technology as well with the Q&A. Hi Lila, hi Dennis, hi Usha. Aloha Melissa. I'm super excited to see the various reasons why people are joining us today. Let's see, maybe I'll just read some of the responses. People are interested in climate change adaptation. They want to learn more about climate change in Hawaii. They've been invited by a coworker and they have an interest in environmental science and energy sciences. Awesome. Welcome everybody. I'm super excited to have this discussion with you all. We had a wonderful response to today's event. Over 150 people signed up, so I'm super excited. Okay, so if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat box by inputting where you're calling from and what motivated you to join today's webinar. Hi, Ida. All right. Next on the Q&A, if you can please enter what questions you are hoping will be answered by today's discussion. And please, if you haven't already, please continue to introduce yourselves. All right. So I know people are still joining the discussion, so I will repeat one last time in the Q&A. If you can please input what sort of questions you are hoping will be answered by today's discussion. As a heads up, we are going to have, towards the end of this webinar, time for us to have more of a dialogue with the various panelists, and hopefully we'll be getting to your questions. So one of the attendees said in the Q&A that they're very interested in hearing about ideas for using the challenges opportunity of COVID economic recovery to drive mitigation actions. Also, what are the chances that funds will be available for ecological restoration work, considering the state's dire financial status? And then also, what is the state of Hawaii planning to do to address potential extreme weather events? And we keep getting more questions. Please continue to input your questions, not only now, but throughout today's discussion. Jeff Lapola is going to be guiding us through a Q&A discussion with the panelists later today. All right. So before we get much further, I would like to say mahalo, or thank you, first and foremost to Dennis Teranishi, who is the president and CEO of PICHTR. He's been extremely supportive of this initiative and this latest program, which is Climate Adaptation Collective. I would also like to thank the Climate Adaptation Collective team, starting with Jeff Lapola, Naoki Nagai, Dexter Pang, Janelle Pang, Lisa Ohm, and Lisa Gollin, who all helped to support today's program. I would also like to thank our board from PICHTR, Dwayne Kurisu, Colbert Matsumoto, Brendan Morioka, Jennifer Sabaz, Paul Yonamine, and Masakazu Toyota. Thank you all very, very much. I would also like to thank our presenters that are coming to us from University of Hawaii Manoa, North Miami, Florida, the Hawaii Department of Transportation, as well as those that helped us to get the word out on today's event, including the Hawaii Climate Commission, IQ 360, Elemental Accelerator, Hawaii Community Benefits Consultants, SSFM, and the Hawaii Chamber of Commerce. For today's discussion, I'm going to be providing a quick overview on PICHTR's Climate Adaptation Collective Program. Then I will introduce our panelists before we go into 3 panel discussions, followed by a group discussion in Q&A. A bit about the Climate Adaptation Collective Program. This is PICHTR's newest initiative, and it's being launched today, and we're so grateful that you're here with us for this event. Our focus is, of course, on climate change adaptation. It's on capacity building and advocacy, and the word collective refers to the collection of related challenges, opportunities, and people committed to making a meaningful difference in climate change adaptation. A bit of a backdrop on today's discussion. There's been a lot of press around how COVID-19 has slowed down the economy and also lowered greenhouse gas emissions. But as you will see from today's discussion, it's not enough to reverse global warming. And moreover, climate change impacts are here. You will be seeing examples not only from Hawaii, but also from the city of North Miami in Florida. And so the focus of today's discussion is how climate change adaptation can serve as a lever for economic growth through the development of a more diversified, stronger, resilient economy that is in line with the demands of climate change. So without further delay, I would like to introduce you to our 3 panelists. First, we have Chip Fletcher. He is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and Professor at the School of Ocean and Earth Sciences and Technology at the University of Hawaii Manoa. He is also the Vice Chair of the Honolulu Climate Change Commission. His research focuses on climate change and impacts to island communities. And him and his team of researchers have published over 40 papers in the past decade focused on observations and modeling related to sea level rise. Welcome, Chip. Next, we have Linda Julian. She is the Economic Development Manager at the City of North Miami. She is focused in the areas of community and economic development. And Linda's most notable project is a $4 billion 15-year residential and commercial private-public partnership. Linda believes strongly in fostering public-private alliances to transform communities. So welcome, Linda. And last but not least, we have Ed Sniffen. He is the Highways Deputy Director at the Hawaii Department of Transportation, where he is responsible for 2,500 lane miles of highway and 741 bridges across 6 Hawaiian islands. His mission is the development and improvement of Hawaii's highway transportation systems and people to facilitate sustainable, safe, and efficient travel and commerce statewide. He is driven to improve the division's implementation of its key programs by modernizing its processes, partnerships, and strategies to provide Hawaii's residents and visitors a quality of life and experiences they deserve with the resources at hand. So without further delay, I would love to introduce you to Chip Fletcher. He will be reviewing and providing an update on the global climate change status, what is needed to move Kaka'ako and Waikiki, which is part of the Honolulu urban core, towards sea level rise resiliency, as well as provide potential economic opportunities resulting from climate change resilience measures. So with that, Chip, please take it away.
Thank you, Veronica. Let me start my talk. And can you see my slides all right?
Yes, it's perfect.
All right, so I've titled this View Adaptation as an Opportunity for Economic and Community Revitalization. Let's do some climate reality review. Starting from the 1880s, we have a very well-founded idea of how greenhouse gases have accumulated. Here you can see carbon dioxide, and this is the parallel rise in global temperature. You can see it's highly variable with hot years and cooler years, but the long-term trend in temperature is very clear. Overall, CO2 accumulation is accelerating. Warming is also accelerating. We've currently warmed the planet about a little over 2 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.2 degrees Celsius. And we're on track to achieve about 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming above the natural background by the end of this decade. And another 15 years after that to hit the target of 2 degrees Celsius. Both of these are United Nations targets that have been agreed to by the world as temperatures where we need to stop the warming. As you'll see in the next couple of slides, this is going to be very difficult. It is now no longer simply about cutting greenhouse gas emissions. The pace of climate change has been rapid, and over the past century, few people other than scientists have noticed. In the first 80 years of the 20th century, a new global temperature record was set roughly every 13.5 years. But in the past 40 years, we're setting temperatures now approximately every 3 years on average. Annual greenhouse gas emissions continue to set new records, and the rate of carbon dioxide growth in the atmosphere has more than doubled. The International Energy Agency has projected that energy demand by 2040 is set to grow more than 25%. And they say in their report, which was published last year, by 2040, renewables will make up only 2/3 of new capacity, and oil consumption grows due to rising demand for petrochemicals, trucking, aviation, and energy every year. Another institute, the congressionally funded Resources for the Future Institute, projected that global energy consumption will grow between 20 and 30% or more through the year 2040 and beyond, led largely by fossil fuels. They stated that renewable energy grows rapidly, though it primarily adds to rather than displaces fossil fuels. The truth is that fossil fuel use is actually accelerating faster than renewable energy use. And you can see here, updated to last year, the increase in use of fossil fuels has outpaced the increase in the use of non-carbon forms of energy. So among these climate change realities, we can ask, will carbon removal technologies counteract rising greenhouse gas emissions? In 2018, 23 commercial scale carbon capture and storage projects were in operation or under construction around the world, capturing 40 million metric tons of carbon dioxide annually. Unfortunately, this is 1/1000th of what our annual emissions are. We also have what's known as committed warming. That is, greenhouse gas emissions originating today will not contribute to global warming for another 10 to 30 years. We have the phenomenon of global dimming. The rise of clean energy will allow more sunlight to enter Earth's atmosphere because we are replacing the pollutants that are generated by fossil fuels, and this enhances warming. So this committed warming averages is thought to average roughly 0.5 degrees Celsius of additional heating that would occur even if we were to stop all emissions now. And so we've probably already committed to breaching the first Paris target of 1.5 degrees C. We also have the reality of the carbon budget. For a 2/3 chance of keeping warming below 1.5 degrees C, we can only emit another 420 billion tons of carbon dioxide. We are now averaging something above 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide emitted every year. And at 1990 levels, we have less than 10 years of emissions before we're committed to a 2/3 probability of warming 1.5 degrees C. There is the decrease in emissions due to the COVID pandemic, and I'll be happy to take a question on that, but I won't cover it right now. The fact is that emissions have to quickly fall to around 20 to 30 billion tons of CO2 per year this decade, and then sharply continue to drop towards zero, reaching zero emissions by mid-century in order to stay within the budget. Unfortunately, most of the world's energy economists are projecting a rise in global carbon dioxide emissions, averaging on the order of 50 billion tons per year just by the end of this decade. Thus, staying within the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees C will be extremely difficult. We also have existing infrastructure. If existing sources of fossil fuel emissions, such as factories, cars, and power plants, simply continue to operate for their expected lifetime, that is another 650 billion tons of carbon dioxide, which is 55% more than allowable emissions for this 2/3 possibility of stopping warming at 1.5 degrees. Decommissioning such infrastructure, considering how expensive it is before its planned lifetime, puts at risk enormous levels of invested capital. It puts at risk jobs and entire communities that have been built around these assets. Of course, global warming leads to sea level rise, and today's sea level rise reflects not only the influence of present day warming, but past warming as well. There is a time lag of decades to thousands of years between air temperature and the adjustment of glaciers and oceans to reach an equilibrium to that air temperature. It's analogous to taking a great big block of ice and putting it on a table in your room. It doesn't melt like that. It takes time. And that's the same sort of inertia that is involved in warming the ocean, which leads to thermal expansion and melting the ice sheets of the world. So today's rate of sea level rise acceleration doesn't actually reflect today's level of global warming. So today's acceleration is going to increase. The current rate of acceleration is on pace to over 2 feet by the end of the century. And there are certain geophysical effects on the planet related to melting the ice that mean that Hawaii and other tropical Pacific locations will see someplace between 20 and 30% more than the global rate of sea level rise. So between temporal lags, committed warming, carbon budgets, and continued emissions, it's extremely likely that global warming and hence sea level rise will continue to grow. Sea level rise will likely increase, and by the end of the century may exceed 3.2 feet. Studies, in fact, identify a 10% probability of sea level rise reaching over 6 feet. And beyond this century, sea level will continue to rise for centuries due to continuing deep ocean heat uptake and mass loss of the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets. The sea level will remain elevated for thousands of years. We know that portions of the West Antarctic ice sheet are already in a state of irreversible collapse. And between 2 and 3 degrees of global warming, Antarctic ice could raise sea level 10 feet by the year 2300 and continue for thousands of years thereafter. We are worried about ice streams in the East Antarctic ice sheet and the fact that they are demonstrating elements of instability. And the Greenland ice sheet may pass a tipping point once we pass 1.5 degrees C of net warming. Ice is being lost from Greenland 7 times faster now than it was in the 1990s. Over 90% of the heat trapped by greenhouse gases is absorbed in the ocean, and this leads to thermal expansion, which over the past decade and a half is responsible for about 1/3 of global sea level rise. Today, we measure global sea level rise using satellite altimetry, a mission that began in 1993, and since then, we have seen a long-term rise over that period of about 1 foot per century. But if we look at just the last decade from satellite altimetry, we see that the rate of global sea level has accelerated to 1.5 feet per century. So what does this look like locally? Here is an aerial photo of Waikiki and Kaka'ako at today's mean high water, which is the average of the highest tides of the day. With 1 foot of sea level rise, we begin to see the edges of the Alawai and other coastal areas experiencing some flooding. At 2 feet of sea level rise, the Alawai golf course turns into a wetland. And between 2 and 3 feet of sea level rise, we see a dramatic change from what would be more minor flooding to very dramatic and persistent flooding. At 4 feet of sea level rise, 5, and 6 feet of sea level rise, we look at an expansion of the flood zone and a deepening of the flood zone. And again, 6 feet of sea level rise, in fact, 7 and 8 feet of sea level rise this century is within the realm of plausibility should portions of the Antarctic ice sheet experience rapid collapse. We also have the problem of king tides, which today are rare, but are projected to rapidly increase to dozens of times per year within only the next 2 or 3 decades. King tides lead to salt water coming out of our storm drains. They lead to the temporary raising of the water table so that it creates wetlands when it crosses the land surface. And of course, it leads to coastal erosion and high waves running up over beaches. And should we have a rain event at the same time that we have the highest tide of the day, we tend to get urban flooding because there's no drainage capacity. So what should we do about this problem? Focusing on Kaka'ako, I think that's a living laboratory, and it needs a plan with a foundation of governing design principles. I believe we should commit to the city's vision of denser, walkable, mixed-use communities close to transit, strategically relocate improvements above or out of flood zones, avoid the worst inundation areas until infrastructure studies and adaptation planning are complete or well underway, reward development shifts outside of the sea level exposure area, within the sea level rise exposure area, emphasize natural solutions, biomimicry, water management, enhanced access to recreation and flood resilient designs. The city complete streets approach should always be kept as a foundational principle for all modes of movement. Get away from the car-dominated communities that we have. Make livable, walkable, rideable, open-air communities that are heavily shaded. A mix of towers and low-rise living units above ground floor commercial space. A mix of housing in the same community from affordable to luxury. Localize education, childcare, and senior care. Plaza-style gathering spaces such as SALT that include resilience, sustainability, and sea level rise and heat adaptive characteristics. Flyover transportation corridors should be considered in certain areas because simply raising roads using fill creates a system of dikes, and the rise of the water table will lead to trapped bodies of water which won't be able to circulate and will likely be polluted. So flyover transportation or raised access ways is going to be important. A design that's overall informed by cultural motifs that promote aloha, community cohesion, and equity, and a holistic water management approach, making use of artificial wetlands, temporary retention of water, designed for a one water approach where precipitation, polluted groundwater, tides, waves, storm surge, runoff, wastewater, and recycled water are all considered part of the same process and the same issue to be dealt with, to be managed. Promote innovative architecture, plumbing, energy, food transportation, and commercial design initiatives, and approach all this with private-public partnerships. Here's one example called Tanner Springs Park in Portland. They have excavated to the water table, created a wetland, and they've used the dredge to raise the surrounding shoreline and built a mix of high and low rise housing with ground level commercial spaces. It's a gathering place, it's cool, and it attracts local wildlife. Another example is in Norfolk, Virginia, where they have taken strong steps to adapting to sea level rise. In 2013, Norfolk released a new comprehensive master plan, Norfolk 2030. It detailed the city's vision with guidance from all sectors. Now, Norfolk is 97% developed, and the plan had a 20-year time frame. The plan's mission was preserving and maintaining the main elements of the city. It was a vision focused on preserving the city as it is today and did not provide the guidance needed to meet the challenges of tomorrow. And within 3 years of that plan coming out, they released an entirely new plan, Vision 2100, which focused on sea level rise, aging infrastructure, population growth, and uncertain regional and global economy. This is a map of Norfolk. Each of these color-coded areas implies certain types of planning. The red implies enhanced economic engines. It's home to key economic assets that are essential to the city's future. They propose to expand the flood protection system, build a comprehensive transportation network, transform less intense uses into denser mixed use patterns, diversify housing options available to residents, and strengthen and increase economic diversity. In brown is...
Sorry, Chip, this is Veronica. If I can ask you to please wrap up. I know you're towards the end of the presentation.
Yep, I'm almost there. In
Thank you.
brown is adapting to rising waters and using established neighborhoods that experience more frequent flooding. In green is designing new urban centers with a low risk of coastal flooding, and these have great potential for high density, mixed use, income development. And purple is establishing neighborhoods of the future. So are there economic opportunities in a new model for the visitor industry in Hawaii? The historic visitor model was based on growth, and it discouraged a diverse economy, and large aspects were not locally owned. In a non-expanding resource base, growth leads to crash. This is augmented by a lack of economic diversity and lack of local ownership. A new visitor model would have more locally focused, diversified characteristics, such as an annual visitor cap, a revenue model that leverages upper-level repeat visitors, subsidies promoting local ownership, tourism revenues focused on workforce development in diverse fields, decentralizing the visitor infrastructure, promoting low-profile, low-impact visitor distribution into communities. They are there already, but they're out of control. And a revenue model that regenerates those and neighboring communities. And between these, deconstruct portions of Waikiki to adapt to sea level rise and create more open space. So lastly, what lessons have we learned from COVID-19? It takes more than individual action to solve a global crisis. We are sheltering in place, and it has required personal action, but it's not been a personal choice. We're following shelter-in-place guidelines dictated by federal, state, and local agencies, and climate change, like a pandemic, can only be solved by systemic change that requires leaders making bold decisions informed by the best science. Have our leaders learned how to do this? It's not an either-or situation. In fact, individual action and systemic change are both required to move the needle on climate change. And I'll end with that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. So there was a question from one of the participants about whether or not we would be making the slides available, and our plan is yes, to make the slides available as well as today's recording, and we'll provide you more information afterwards. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Linda Julian. Linda, I think
Veronica.
Perfect, thank you.
Hi, Veronica. Thank you so much for having me today. And thank you to everyone that is joining us today. My name is Linda Julian. I am the Economic Development Manager at the City of North Miami in North Miami, Florida. And today I'm going to talk to you all about the City of North Miami and our Climate Hub. Okay, so the City of North Miami's Climate Hub initiative, what is it? Just to give you a little bit of context, the North Miami Climate Hub came about from a target industry analysis that we just wrapped up last week. The objective of the study was to combine sorts of analytical tools with the latest thinking in economic development, workforce training, and some of like community-based principles in order to create an innovative and publicly supported strategy. The focus was on business retention and recruitment and expansion. The analysis allowed the city to identify its competitive advantage in key industries within our industrial and commercial districts. The study was funded by the Department of Economic Development Administration. So what did we find from this study? Our findings were that, well, for one, let me just tell you that North Miami is a coastal city. We lie on the Biscayne Bay of the Atlantic Ocean. And what the target industry analysis revealed to us is that there is a multi-sector environmental and climate industry that we can tap into with our economic development efforts. Before we conducted the study, the Community Planning and Development Department recognized that the city of North Miami was vulnerable to flooding and that we needed a plan, to put a plan in place. We are a coastal city, and so we decided to implement the Resilient NOMI. Now, the Resilient NOMI is a sustainable initiative that provides policy for green building standards and green housing guidelines for projects that are funded through community development block grants. Under the Resilient NOMI, we've created programs such as the Green Commercial Rehab Grant to assist business owners, and allow them to put up hurricane impact windows, get new AC units installed, generators, anything that would allow them to get some savings on their electricity bill. The City of North Miami also provided the City of North Miami also took place in what we call the Van Allen Institute project. This Van Allen Institute project, and I think my slides, I just got to go back here, but the Van Allen Institute project basically was an initiative created for a design of some sort that would help to mitigate stormwater. We launched the storm mitigation project for our repetitive loss property. These properties were vacant lots that were flood prone. So the project acts as a drainage to absorb water from 20 surrounding sites. The project also acts as a public park that educates residents about sea level rise, right, and the implications of it. It has a water marker so that you can see how high the water tends to go up. I'm happy to report that the project was successful and has helped us build a brand for environmental sustainability. In addition to the Resilient NOMI project, which we undertook, we came up with an electric vehicle station. So this electric vehicle station is twofold. It has two ports and 2 cars can charge at the same time. So it is just the start of the future of installations around our city. Now, in my next slide here, you can see the effects that climate change has on the city of North Miami. So we are no stranger to sea level rise and king tides and flooding and global warming. So Resilient NOMI basically was a program put in place to take measures and to put measures in place to continue to elevate and fine tune our environmental and sustainability efforts.
Linda, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so currently what we are seeing is your staffing profile for Miami slide. We're not seeing your other slides.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no. What about now?
No, it's not.
Huh.
It's not
Okay, hold on. Let me try this again.
there.
What about now?
Yes, now we can see your slides. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. My apologies. Okay, so I'll take it back just a notch. And so the Resilient NOMI was a measure that our department put in place to continue to elevate and fine tune, our environmental and sustainability efforts, okay? All right, so I'm switching my slide and I hope that you can see it. Do you see this next slide here? With the sea level rise?
We do. It's working now. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect, perfect. And so we are no stranger to flooding and king tides and all the sorts. So, our thought process is how do we begin to be creative with what we have, and how do we allow it to provide some economic development, if you will, for our city. And so after conducting the target industry analysis, what we discovered was that North Miami as a coastal city is a gem, right? And so we are well positioned to play a role in the sustainability solutions, and that we should partner with our anchor institution, Florida International University. Now, just to give you a little bit of context about FIU, FIU is located right here in our city of North Miami, the Biscayne Bay campus, and FIU accommodates over 7,000 students on a 200-acre property. Now, the university has a marine sciences program that specializes in coastal ecosystems and research throughout South Florida and the Caribbean. The program is committed to the community outreach and education. And so one of the unique programs within FIU is the Marine Academy of Science and Technology, which we refer to as the MAST program. It is the only public magnet high school in our county of Miami-Dade that specializes in marine and environmental science. And it is the only public school in the state of Florida to collaborate with FIU. And in addition to that, I will add that FIU has an environmental sea level solution center. So this is right here in our backyard in North Miami. Now, according to the Bureau of Statistics, of Labor Statistics, employment in the areas of, and as you can see on my screen here on the graph, employment in the areas of engineering, research, environmental sustainability are at an all-time peak compared to other industries. So if you look at the graph to my left here, you'll see that consulting services in the area of engineering and research as it relates to climate change, in 2009, we were at about 37,000 or so when it came to like employment right here. And then you fast forward to 2020 and we are just above 50,000. And then if you look, if you're looking ahead, you'll see that by 2023, we are slated to be just about double that of 2009. So this does show that, you know, storms and global warming, all that stuff is, you know, it's bad, if you will, but then it creates jobs, if you will, right? If you look to the right of my screen, you'll see the graph here that demonstrates target growth, right? So you have environmental sustainability versus other industries. And you'll see that the environmental component of it in terms of employment and career is higher than other industries. And so there is a potential there for job creation and economic development. So I tell folks all the time that there's always a demand for work in this space. So this next slide that I have up here is a staffing profile for this part of the region. So if you look, you'll see the description for positions that are classified within the environmental and sustainability sector. You have biochemical engineers and surveyors, and you have electrical engineers and construction managers. But what you will see is that in 2019, there were tons of jobs just in this field alone, tons of jobs that paid decent wages. So again, discovering from this target industry analysis that we are sitting on a gold mine. I mean, we are a coastal city. We are prone to flooding and hurricanes. However, it is an opportunity to turn that into economic development. I will tell you though, what I didn't see in the study, but discovered was that North Miami is surrounded by what I consider scientist-led startups and lots of data analytics. And so when we look at the news or we read articles, you know, there's lots of data in there about storms and hardest hit areas and all sorts of other types of data that is needed, right? But I will tell you that startups are growing rapidly in our area. And one particular company called Ecosystems is a Miami-based startup ran by two brothers. Their motto is conversation is good for business. Conservation, excuse me, not conversation. Conservation is good for business. They are small business owners, entrepreneurs who specialize in water solutions, energy solutions, and green loans, right? So what kind of, and I actually know them personally, what kind of started as a single focus on water conservation has grown, I'd say, organically into like a full service water and energy conservation company. They also specialize in efficient and dependable quality solutions, and work with public and private sectors, right? And then another organization that I came across, because we here at the City of North Miami provide a green rehab grant for our business owners. So another company that I came across is Dream and Green, and what they do similar to ecosystems, and they respond to climate and environmental changes, and they provide data and research. So I say this to say that there are lots of economic opportunities when it comes to environmental sustainability, right? And so I'll tell you about one of our projects here.
Sorry, this is Veronica. I'm sorry. May I please ask you to wrap up?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll tell you about Sole Mia, which used to be a landfill, okay, now turned into a commercial real estate development project. The photo on top you'll see was before anything was built. The soil was graded. And then below you'll see the towers that have been built, and to the right you'll see a crystal blue lagoon. So they've totally taken this landfill site and turned it into a community for folks to live in. In addition to that, we are also home to Olito River State Park, which brings in tons of money from tourism every year. So on average, a person visiting the park will spend about $124, right? And the total direct economic impact is $46,835,000 back in 2018, with 749 jobs supported. So what does North Miami hope to get out of this Climate Hub initiative? We want to build a brand that embraces environmental sustainability. But in addition, we want to build a partnership with our anchor institution over at FIU, job creation, economic impact, and we want to serve as an economic engine using procurement and infrastructure investments to support sustainability and resiliency. And Sole Mia is a perfect example of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. That was excellent. Ed, can I please turn it over to you now?
Sounds good. I'll share mine now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Jake, I love Chip. I cringe every time I hear him speak about climate change. It scares the bejesus out of me all the time. And that's a good thing, because he's helping to put that emergency in front of us. A lot of situations require that we recognize the emergency that's coming, and climate change is a difficult one. It's hard to tell somebody, be worried about something that's going to happen in the future. And we know that it's from human nature. Also love hearing how Linda and North Miami are taking advantage of the opportunities that come from emergencies to push forward on all of this. They're being more proactive than reactive, which is kind of the situation that we're finding ourselves in. For us, Highways has taken a look at how we're going to be affected by climate change, not only from a shoreline protection perspective or inundation perspective, but throughout our whole program. But to start this up, on the first step in our tiering process, we started looking at what reports and information we had from the past and how we move forward. One of the PICHTR board members, our previous director, Brendan Morioka, did a pretty good job of being proactive in asking us to look at what statewide coastal areas would be affected by shoreline erosion in the near future. We did that report in 2003. We also did a rockfall protection study in 2007. Since then, we've done almost nothing with those reports. And we've been paying for it throughout. So last year, we updated the report. We made sure that we pulled in experts from UH and other partners to ensure that we looked at areas that we need to address right away. And again, it's the first tier in the approach. We wanted to look at our vulnerabilities. Where are we vulnerable, and what can we do right now within the next year to protect our system to ensure that we don't lose anything? So that's what the report was. It kicked up a prioritization of all of our system. It allowed us to see what we need to do in the first year to ensure that we don't lose anything. Then it allows us to start looking forward into the next 5 to 10 years to see what we can do from an easy perspective to start adjusting for resiliency, making sure that systems that are impacted now, potentially with the 1 meter rise in the future, what can we do now to ensure that they don't get impacted? And then we start looking at our long-term resiliency, 10 years and beyond. We're pulling in for that, we're pulling in other partners, resource agencies, planning agencies to ensure that we understand what the system's actually gonna look like. For us at Highways, we don't just build roads to build them. We make sure that we connect our beloved communities throughout. So we wanna make sure we understand what land use is gonna look like at mid-century and at the turn of the century to ensure that we're putting money where it should go. That's the push for us. Now again, we were not proactive in the past. We're trying to make sure that we put this information together now so we can plan accordingly and put that information out to the decision makers, the policy makers who fund us, the decision makers in public who can help us support the vision of how our system is going to look in the future. This is not moving forward. Oh, sorry. So part of this, when we started looking at the areas that we need to address, we're looking at Hauula area. One thing that was made very clear, we had a set time frame of how we're going to move forward. Nature didn't care. It started taking its effects on us no matter what we thought we were going to do in a planning perspective. So we changed our operations to ensure that we address these areas in Hauula on Kamehameha Highway very quickly. We were looking at a year from the time we did the report. We did it in 6 months to ensure that we could protect the facilities. Out here, we put in a cobble and boulder fill or a bagged fill to ensure that we can minimize the energy or maximize energy dissipation and minimize wraparound erosion on any of the coastal areas we don't protect. Not the best solution, but way better than the $30 million retaining wall that we would have done in the past. Moving forward, we're working with DLNR to ensure that we look at some kind of beach restoration to not only protect our facilities, but also give back some of the resources to the community that they had lost over time because of erosion. So that's the approach that we're looking at going forward. We could use these kinds of examples from all different islands. Kuyo Highway on Kauai, where we saw 2 days of the most rain in the nation. We broke the record for rain. We built the facility back up. We ensured that, that it was dependable and safe. And we just had a rain event that was bigger recently this year, and the facility handled it perfectly. We had Poly Highway that came down, that rockfall that came down in that area. We made sure that we built a structure that protected everybody from going forward, going into the tunnel. We made sure that no matter what happened to that slope in the future, we don't have to worry about that route. So we built the resiliency into it, but we built into it based on the emergency that we had. For us, we always want to try and live in this planning, design, build, operate, maintain cycle. It's very efficient, it's very easy, it's very dependable. But usually what happens is some kind of emergency hits us. And when it does, we're required to jump in, make sure that our resources are pushed towards emergency management so we can take care of our citizens, protect their health and safety, make sure we can bring the system back online so that it can be used, and then rebuild it to ensure that it doesn't we don't have to worry about the same event that had affected it this time ever affecting it again in the future. And we're good at that. The thing is though, we depend too much on emergency management for our resiliency. I mean, resilience is twofold. You can either do it proactively or reactively. And for Hawaii, we've always been reactive for it. In general, emergencies are kind of cool. When something happens, everybody's aligned in their approach. Funds become available. Alignment between government and private industry and the public, all on what needs to be done in a short time frame. All the obstacles of project delivery go away because we know there's a need to push it out there. The bad thing about emergencies, when an emergency happens, something failed on your system that could have killed somebody. Something failed on your system that will impact people's lives for a significant period of time. For us now, we're trying to adjust to ensure that 80% of those emergencies are now taken care of. So we're trying to be more proactive in our approach. To do that though, we need to start pushing that we can develop those jobs that Linda talked about that come out of emergencies, but develop them early enough in the planning and design and delivery process to ensure that when the emergency occurs, we were proactive enough to minimize our emergency response at that time. That's the difficult thing though. Money follows what people see as the priority. Emergency is a priority, big time. Having people like Chip and a lot of people I saw on this call pushing that message out that this is already an emergency and we have the opportunity to address it right now absolutely matters. I mean, that should be our big push right now. But of course, it's going to take time. It's a difficult discussion to have, to say that this big bad monster that's going to come up 50 years down the road is here right now. So we're trying to push it to ensure that we start taking the lessons that we learn from these emergencies before the emergency occurs, to push resiliency into all of our processes to ensure that our response to the emergency is minimized. That's the push for us. Now, when we start looking at that, everybody got to understand what that means. It's a money thing. If we start pushing more resources into what could happen in the future, there's less resources available to address other things that happen in the system. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing that we got to make sure we can explain to the public and to our legislators to ensure that everybody's on the same page as we go forward. Now, to ensure this happens and we give them the most information we can, we're pushing a resiliency study. We're pulling everybody together so we can get all this information together to show this is what Hawaii is going to look like in the future. This is what our transportation system needs to look like to service that, because we're here to service our community. Now, for us, we know that just reacting or pre-planning to ensure that our system is operational and servicing the way everyone expects it is not enough. We're part of the problem. I mean, if you look at Chip's numbers, he always tells me we're the biggest part of the problem. Transportation is the biggest, dirtiest industry out there. It used to be energy, now it's us. So we're trying to make sure that we do our part in minimizing what's actually causing these situations, what's making those storm events more extreme more often, what's causing our sea levels to rise. We're trying to make sure we green our operations. Now, the cool thing again, this is an emergency, so there's a lot of opportunities that come out of it. For DOT, we push forward on a lot of technology to ensure that we push forward on an energy savings performance contract that was the biggest in the nation at the time. And what it allowed us to do is cut our DOT costs, energy costs, that's for highways, airports, and harbors, in half over the last 4 years. So a significant push, but it was necessary. The thing is, though, we didn't push forward on this and say that we're gonna solve the problems that come from sea level rise. We said we're gonna push forward on this because of costs. There was a dual action on it, but we knew we wanted to make sure we greened and cleaned our industry. And we pushed forward on making sure that we have an EV contract now, an EV contract that allows us to purchase EVs as a service. We don't have to buy a vehicle anymore. We don't have to buy the charging station. We can purchase it as a service a lot cheaper over a lot longer period of time. This year, we're gonna convert 40 electric vehicles to, yeah.
I'm sorry. Can I please ask you to wrap up? Unfortunately, we're getting to the top of the hour.
No problem. So we're going to convert 40 electric vehicles from our system, and it's only going to cost us $150,000 per year for the next 10 years. It would have cost me $2.5 million to purchase those vehicles and the associated charging stations. So there's a lot of opportunities that we're pushing forward on. One of the biggest that's coming out of COVID is making sure that telework is a viable option for all state employees as we go forward. If we look at our union, there's 29,000 employees in the state and county unions. If we can get a third of them on telework, that means we pull 10,000 vehicles potentially off the system. That's a significant change in the VMTs and also a significant change in the peak traffic, helping us reduce our emissions during that time. But I'll end now so we can start getting the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. That was terrific. So I would like to turn it over now to Jeff. I know we are running out of time, so why don't we take a couple of questions. If anybody needs to, jump off, totally, respect your time. So that's okay. But Jeff, why don't you take it, ask us a couple of questions or provide a couple of questions from the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Veronica. So this question goes out to the panel, and we have, what can individual citizens do to help contribute to the thoughtful reopening of the economy at this time with climate change in mind?
Yeah, this is Chip. I would just quickly say that there are lots of resources online to tell you what sort of personal actions you might want to take in changing your lifestyle, your choices. You can educate yourself, and it's a chance to take those opportunities and to change certain parts of how you live your life with regard to climate change.
Great, thanks, Chip. Linda, address this question to you. I know a lot of our audience from Hawaii, but how has Miami leveraged the post-COVID policies towards investment toward addressing climate change? So has there been a change in post-COVID policies towards investment towards climate change?
So I will tell you that post-COVID, we're still in COVID, but, lots of investments are popping up. I will tell you that we are taking measures to prevent something like this happening again. And with every pandemic, I will say that new ideas always come about. And I'll give you a perfect example. With the last recession back in 2008, 2009, that's how Uber and Lyft came about, right? And so we're seeing that with this pandemic, with the high rates of unemployment, people are kind of shifting their thought process and creating startups and creating investment opportunities that will take us to a whole different ball game a year or two from now.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Jeff, how about one last question?
All right, so let's go to Edward. This one, a specific DOT question. Does the Department of Transportation have any cost estimates for road relocation or reinforcement due to sea level rise?
Yeah, so we start looking at the system that we have. About 15% of the roads will be inundated either by sea level rise or associated groundwater level rise. And assuming the bridges and the roads that we need to relocate and the structures that we have to construct, if we just relocated those roads laterally inland, it would be about $15 billion. So when you look at the improvements that we did for Hauula, we did it for $4 million. And people who drive through say it looks like a Band-Aid solution. It is. It's only supposed to be there for the next 5 to 10 years until we know what we need to do going forward. Now, when we look at that route, that 10-mile segment of Hauula, if we just moved it inland, it's $1.5 billion. So it's a significant cost that we'd have to look at. And we want to make sure, we don't mind doing it. We just want to make sure that when we do it thoughtfully, and we do it to support the community that's going to be there. For Hauula, the community that lives off the road is at the road level or below it. So if that road is going to be inundated, what makes me think the community is still going to be there? And if the community is not there, then what should we do to support the community and where they're going to be from the future?
Interesting. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I wish we had scheduled a longer discussion, but I would like to thank Chip, Linda, and Ed for an excellent presentation and discussion. Oops, what happened here? So in terms of next steps, what's going to happen is that we will be sending you our slides, the video recording as well as a feedback survey. We plan to provide the slides in our website as well. We will provide you that information. Our next virtual gathering is probably going to be in about a month. And I just want to say thank you so much for everybody's participation. It was a really great discussion, and we look forward to bringing you other wonderful climate adaptation discussions. So with that, thank you everybody, and until next time. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.